This is Gemara Sanhedrin Daf Tes Afreilich in Chanukah, the Daf for the first day of Chanukah. We pick it up on Chesam and Beis, 5 lines from the bottom of the learning once again. Should be an incredible zchos refuah shalema for Tinok ben Miri Ahuva b'siyata d'shmaya. The continuous koyach ha'Torah b'rabim, especially the Torah learned on the wonderful Yontiv of Chanukah, should bring Tinok ben Miri Ahuva continued Yeshuais and refuah shalema. We are holding 5 lines from the bottom of Chesed and Beis. The first line is Papa. Rapapa Amar. We're in the middle of discussing in general that when we give a hasra in the manner which is more general, and will that allow for the Bezdin to apply any of the death penalties? Will Bezdin be able to facilitate such a punishment if the hasra was not direct? And we had a machlaikas. The Chachamim held that you could, and therefore you're going to need a Bezdin of 23 because it's going to be considered a capital crime, a crime which could result in death. Ramir held like Rav Yehuda that no, only if the hasra was specific to the act at hand, specific to the potential punishment, only in such a case would a misa be able to apply it. So Rabba Amar comes on Rabba and he says, Achab Isha Chavira Askinan says, Rabba, we're dealing with a woman who was a learned woman, and she did not receive any asra at all. So what's the machlekes? Looked at Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda, v'Rabbanan. What's the machlekes? The Tanya we learned in a rice. Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda, Imer chaver ein sarich asra. Says Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda, chaver, a learned person, does not require hasra. Why? What is the whole purpose? We have to go deep into the aside. What is the impetus behind the Torah requiring us to give hasra, to give a warning? Says the Gemara, teaches Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda, the reason is Ella. Only lahavchin on the very bottom of Chesem Beis, lahavchin in shagil lemeiz. And therefore, in a scenario in which one knows the halacha, there's no need for asra. So in our case, even a general asra will make no difference as any level of asra, because the woman was learned, and therefore there could be a potential death penalty without any hasra at all. Continues the Gemara with a fifth opinion. Rav Ashi Amar says, Rav Ashi, as we turn over to Daf Tesam and Aleph, teaches Rav Ashi that what's the case? Ta'asri bei malkos v'lo asri bei katala. Says Rav Ashi, you know what the case is? The case is one in which the hasra was only given for part. The case is that the Reidim that give hasra to the woman that if she is mezaneh, she's going to get malchus. However, they did not give her the full hasra that she could potentially be subject to the death penalty. In that case, the halacha is there is no death penalty, but there will only be malchus. This is going to be a machlekes between Rav Yishmael and Rabbanan. The Tanan, 3 lines down to Samad Aleph. Malchus b'shleisha mishum Rav Yishmael amru b'etzer b'shleisha. A simple machlekes. What is the status of malchus? Is malchus something akin to death, and therefore you need a full 23, or is it more similar to regular than Torah and will suffice with 3 dayanim? So what's coming out is that we now have brought down a new machlekes. So when it comes to malchus, how do we view malchus? Is malchus something that would require a full bezdin of 23 or not? Ravina Amar, a 6th way of learning, Kigoin shenimsa echem in eidim karayv apostle. The case is the husband had many eidim to prove that his wife was mizaneh. The problem is one of the eidim is found to be a karayv or apostle. V'kamiflikli b'flikta de Rav Yossi, Rav Elad, Rav Akiva, the Tanan. Rav Akiva Aimer Leiba Shlishi El Hachmer Alav. Says Rav Akiva, what is the third aid coming to teach to be chamer? Why? Lasa is a dinai ki yaitze be'elu, to make his din the same as the first two Eidim. Imkain, if that is true, says the Gemara, comes out, how could it be that the Torah is going to punish one who was a nitval? He's an accomplice l'Oiver Aveira. How could it be that we're going to treat him ka'Oivre Aveira, like the one who did the Aveira himself? Alachas kama v'kama she'ishalim sachar es ha'nitval oisei mitzvah ke'oisei mitzvah. How much more so will the Torah give reward? So Rikiva parenthetically over here points out that if we see that when it comes to Aveira, even an auxiliary, even someone who's minorly connected to Aveira gets punishment like it. Says Rabbi Kiva, can you fathom what it would be for Oisei Mitzvah? One would get the same reward. And continues Rabbi Akiva, Mashnayim Nimsa Echamim Karavai Basel. 8 lines from the bottom, and just like when we have two Eidim, if one of them is found to be a Karav or a Basel, Eidusan Betila, their Eidus is null, Avshleisha Nimsa Echamim Karavai Basel, so too. If we were to have 3 Eidim and one is found to be Karav or Basel, Eidusan Betila, their Eidus is Batal. Meaning that if we have one of the Eidim, doesn't have to be all of them, we have 3 Eidim, and one of them is Basel and messes them all up. Uminayin Shafilu Meya. And how do we know a chiddush that even if there are many, many Eidim, and one of the 100, one of this incredible group, is found to be Karavai Pasal Tamaloimer, Eidim plural, that any level of paslus in the group will pasal them all up, even if it's only one of them. Continues the Gemara, Omar Rav Yosi. So Rav Yosi comes along to explain that B'medvar Mamurim, when exactly does this din of Rav Akiva apply? Bedine nefashos. Aval, however, bedine mamanis, mamanis, or bedine mamoinos, literally, tiskayim eidos bishar. Even though there is this one Eid which is possible, the rest of the Eidim could fulfill the Eidos. Rebbe says no. Echadine mamanis, vechadine nefashos. Whether it's dine mamanis, whether it's dine nefashos, comes along Rebbe and he says it's going to have the same halacha. Then in both cases, if there is an Eid which is possible, it's going to invalidate the entire testimony. Ve'masai. So when is it true with regarding dini nefashis? Bizman shahasru b'hen, avosban shalo yasru b'hen. It's only when there is hasra. But when there's no hasra, then he is not considered a part of this group that receive the part of this group, and therefore, even though he is a karov, he is pasleidas, he will not mess up the rest of the group. Now, Rebbe comes along and says, why am I forced to say this? As we turn over to Testament Bees, explains the Gemara, you know why? Ma yasu shnei achim. Because what are we going to do? If we don't hold of what we just said, we're going to run into a serious problem. What's the serious kind of problem going to be? The problem is going to be in a scenario of Shnei Achim, when we have 2 brothers. Ve'echon Shara'u and Ve'acher, Shnei Achim, no, Ve'acher, I read it wrong. 2 brothers and a singular different witness. So again, the brothers are Pasaladis. And then there's someone else with them. Shara'u Be'echon Sharigas and Nefesh. They saw someone kill someone. And in that case, if we're going to say that there's no chilik whether there's hasra to the third person or not, so this person who committed murder will have no way of being convicted, because whichever way you're going to cut the pie, you're going to have brothers who are pasal eidos, therefore they'll pasal up the whole thing. So proves the Gemara, you have to say that if there is not a proper hasra, then they will not be included in the psal of the eidos. Viba Yisema continues the Gemara on the second line. This is a seventh way of going back to the Mishnah, of explaining the machlokes in Rameir and the Chachamim. Kegoin shahasru ba achirim v'lo hasru ba edim. The case is that people warned the wife, and the edim were not warned. So what's this machlokes? 4 lines down. V'kamifli v'plukta de Rav Yosef Rabbanan Titanan. We learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yosi Aimer teaches Rabbi Yosi Loilam Einoi Nerag Achu Pishnei Eidov Masrin Boy. Says Rabbi Yosi there's no Dine Nerag, there's no Hariga, there's no execution. There's never going to be a Chiyam Nefashos Achu Pishnei Edom Masrim Boy unless both Edim had given him Hasra. Shenemar says the Pasik, Al Pishnayim Edim, that through two Edim Yakum Davar, that is when Yumas, one could be convicted of a crime, could be killed. So therefore, according to Anikama, Hasra is going to be kosher even if it's by someone who does not testify in Beis Din. And that's going to be the point that Rabbi Yossi is going to disagree. Continues the Gemara, Viba Yisema. An eighth way of learning the Machlekes Ramein the Chachamim Kigoin, that the Machlekes is the it kechoish bebedikais lo it kechoish bechakirais. There's two ways of eidos being contradicted. There is bebedikais through cross-examination, and then there is chakirais through asking questions. Chakirais are the standard questions in order to verify where it happened, the time it happened. Bidikais are all the supplemental questions. They're asked not exactly relevant. They might ask what color was his clothing, etc. So two different ways of cross-examining the Eidim. Says the Gemara, and therefore our Mishnah's machlokes v'kamifli v'plukta de Ben Zakkai v'Rabbanan will be mimicked by Ben Zakkai and the Chachamim, the Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah. Ma'isa, there was a story, Ubadak Ben Zakkai ba'uksei te'inem. There was a story that Ben Zakkai examined regarding the stems of the figs. He asked, Rashi explains, were the stems under of a tree under. Again, there was a crime that was committed, or murder had been committed by this fig tree. So we asked details about the fig tree. Were the branches thick? Were the branches thin? And according to Ben Zakkai, even if they would contradict each other, even in this small detail, a detail that maybe, how should they even know? You got to pay attention. That detail enough would invalidate and void their testimony. However, the Chachamim disagree, and they hold that even a contradiction in such a level would not invalidate the testimony. So the Chachamim in our Mishnah would go with the Shita of the Chachamim arguing Ben Zakkai, and Rameir would be going with the opinion of Ben Zakkai. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef. Says Rav Yosef, we're on the topic of Keidim contradicting each other. Says Rav Yosef, so there's of course a further level of contradiction called Eidei Zaymimin, Kasher Zamam. That why would you try to make someone else be chayiv if one is accused and found to be that he could not have been in the place of the crime? Nimanu ayisem. How did he give edus about that? The halacha is kasher zamam. He bears the punishment that those other people would have gotten. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, on this topic of Eidim Zaymim with regard to the previous case, Hevi Abal Eidim Shazinsa. If the husband had Eidim, that his wife was Mizanev, Hevi Av Eidim, and now the father of the wife brought Eidim, Vehizimam Le'idei Habal, and they discredited, they called the husband's witnesses as Hazama. They said, how could you have witnessed the act of Zinos? You weren't there, you were with us in another place. What's the halacha? Eidei Habal Na'aragin. They're going to be killed. Why are they going to be killed? Because what did they try to convict this woman of? Of Zinos. She would have been Chayim Misa, so they themselves are obligated in such. The Eidim would not pay money. So even though there would be two entities that would have happened. Number one, this woman would have been Chayim Misa. Number two, she would have lost her ksuba. But even still, says the Gemara, that wouldn't be the right case. Even still, even though there were two things that they were trying to obligate in, still the halacha is that there would only be a Chiyuv Isa and ein neharagim mammon. Chazar hevi. Now what if the case develops and Chazar hevi abal eidim v'yizimam? The husband then brings another set of witnesses, and now the hazama goes backwards. The husband brings witnesses which discredits what? The father's witnesses. So it's almost like a double hazama. Again, first the father of the woman has eidim that the husband's eidim couldn't have been there. Now the husband has eidim that what? The father's eidim couldn't have been there. So what's the halacha now? The halacha now is Eidei ha'av neheragin umishalmin. The halacha is the Eidim of the father are killed and umishalmim amain. They bear the brunt of both, because the testimony of such witnesses would, number one, have caused these Eidim to be executed, and number two, the halacha is that the husband would have to pay 100 shekel of Maitzi Shamra, of defiling the woman's name. And therefore, what is the hazama, the reciprocal punishment that goes back to the Eidim, is what? They get both. Mamain lazeh unefashais lazeh. That they're obligated to pay money because they were going to cause the husband money, and they're chayiv misa. Why? Because the Eidim would have been killed. So says the Gemara, in this aforementioned case of the Eidim contradicting each other, we would have a very unique form of hazama. And we conclude, says the Gemara of Amar Rav Yosef, Plaini Ravai Le'insai. One more halacha from Rav Yosef about Eidim. Someone says that a certain person, Plaini Ravai, he was Le'insai, he forced him to have relations. Hu va'acher mitzarfin lahargai. He and another aide combined to kill him. Lirtzainai. If he says that the act was consensual, Rasha, he is a Rasha. According to his own eidos, he's deemed a Rasha, and therefore he will not be able to give testimony. V'atayra amra al tashis Rasha aid. Do not make a Rasha a witness. Rava disagrees. Rava Amar, 2 lines to the bottom. Adam karav eitel atzmai. Vein Adam isim atzei Rasha. We're never going to believe one's eidos to invalidate themselves. Let's take a moment as we end the shir to look at Rashi. Rashi says, what does it mean, Plainei Ravai? Says Rashi, what this means is, b'mishkav zachar. They give eidos that there was an act of mishkav zachar that happened. Le'oinsai, bal karcha, he forced a man to have relations with another man. Hu v'acher, hanir v'azeh kosher le'heid alav. Im yish acher imay nereg ha'rayv al piyem. The person who the act was done to him, it was not consensual, he combines with another person to give such eidos. But let's say he says it was consensual. Ruvain says, I consented to having relations with Shimon. And now we have another eid that wants to combine with Ruvain. Says the Gemara, then Ruvain is not believed. Why not? Because Rasha, he's saying he's a Rasha, and the Torah says a Rasha can't be an aid. Al touches Rasha aid, al touches Yalcha v'chulu. Rava Amar, the last Rashi in the Amid, Rava comes along and says, no, Ein Adam Nifsa Le'idus by Das Pev. One doesn't become puzzle if he admits to doing a crime. Why? And therefore he's not believed. One cannot make himself into a Rasha. What does that mean? With regard to his testimony, he's not made into a Rasha. Why? So Torah says you can't a karuv. If you're related to the person, you're not allowed to give eidos. And this guy's related to himself. And he will be killed. Why will he be killed? You don't have any eidos. The Palkinan Dibure will split his words. Will believe it regarding his family. It comes out a fascinating entity, says the Gemara. Because the halacha is Adam Karvei Tel Atzmai. So he's not believed to make himself a Rasha. He's not believed to make himself a Rasha. We could split his eidos, so for himself he's not believable. We could use his words to combine with the other aid to convict the other guy of the crime, and then he'll be chayav misa. I'll pick it up from here. B'siyata dishmaya.